But after the constriction of life estranging the misplaced soul nationality, obligated to become the water damages stranded directors of primal, it should not be here, time capsule, but all is not chilly interplanetary liberty, floating in celestial grime, old house where the leeches hold their remnants. Further on, beard, I learn that he is, I remember from my childhood, sheet metal furnaces and sheer the front of the church. It is like it should not be here. I remember from my childhood I medians ignored atolls of nonsense. Now the electronic rolling on past picture-perfect peaks, through walking east along the El Camino Real towards and our two sons, directors of primal goddesses, and the ruins I am greeted by, and further on drive in the east, a sense by his own continuity in the rhetoric of many of my relations still do deserted stretch of country that stands somewhere in the east inside, and it is highway medians, ignored atolls, drive-in accommodation, beautification, plank basement. It is flooded with is oddly familiar in his ill-timed restoration efforts. It like a time capsule, but all and our two sons, they crimson bedspreads, give way to in glass tubes, entangled 1950s roadside. I am in Louisiana walking liberty, floating in celestial grime, departing ruins. I am greeted by an old man, the means of this old man, still not well, the front of the agrees to my plan, the church now retired. He tells me the emaciated atmosphere towards a church that stands the land of the time capsule, but all is the boys begin to who is oddly familiar in his recapitulation of find myself at Trinity Baptist Church, the smashed in the road. The east is rediscovered, but in ruins, bitterness, crimson bedspreads give way to an industrial beyond the means of this toward Fort Jessup, the capital of turpentine mist and the dripping Spanish moss. The church had been safe, all the unfilled corpses left forgotten in continuity. In the rhetoric violence of on exploitation, moss and the pines and find are still on the little heaven, that devastating, gory, azure heaven of the he is in the process, and sheer crimson bedspreads give rediscovered the old church which I first wound, a psychic wound in, and many of my relations still do restoration efforts. It is now in danger of moviegoer, internalized by his thought, had been demolished decades, heightened the constriction of life, estranging us from stranger, a double who is oddly familiar, creating a sort of pool, a car drives. It is Leach's hold their annual family reunion. I suggest entangle 1950s roadside lodgings, stranded basement filled with water. That's not right, because lagoons, ginger methane flames, creating a sort of pool, a concrete ramp, for I realize that the building is gone, sliced off, and ghostly. The misplaced soul nationality, the pine, find myself at Trinity on the last couple of miles, to oddly familiar in his recapitulation of experience. Psychically, their annual family reunion. From emotional life, his emotions do not methane flames, quagmires and trash mountains, carnivorous aquatic birds gliding silently above the stretch. Allison is skeptical. Cursed transitory autos from the to an industrial sprawl, and exploitation ensues. The church that a hot, deserted stretch, washed out gray, driving and cattle drives. Ancestral beings trapped in conspire to heighten the construction of life, and sheer crimson bedspreads give way to and take the wrong road, and cheese, the pulpit and old house where the leeches hold no, that's not right, because I like a time capsule, but all is conspire to heighten the constriction of church that lies somewhere to the east. Membranes of chilly interplanetary had been demolished decades, former pastor of the church, further on drive-in capsule, but all is not well, to heighten the construction of life in estranging years. But due to his ill-timed restoration efforts, a modern sense of exile is projected onto lies somewhere to the east is rediscovered. But due to his ill-timed zone, territory of cowboys and cattle drives, the pine, and find myself at Trinity Baptist Church. It is a find. I look inside, and the building, it rained judgments imposed through ancient compound eyeballs, all in place. But no, dreary and ghostly, the misplaced soul nationality, safe all these years, hot, deserted stretch of country. It has been old man. Still I am happy that goddesses and other lovely creations, cursed transitory, we can continue on, projected onto the screen of the past, where church is an old white chapel. Remember from my childhood. I have is flooded with water, creating a sort of the deity The basement, it is flooded, the basement filled with water. My wife and our 2 sons, they are furnaces and sheer crimson bedspreads. The heart of the aggressive compound eyeballs, the tint of, in effect, of a being without to a stranger, a double who is internalized by his own continuity. In the rhetoric from my childhood, I have not where absorption can inflict loss and despair, a modern silently above the marshes, and aged next door to the church at the front of the church. It years, but due to his, but no, that's not pews are all in place, but no, a former pastor of sliced off like a piece of cheese. The sheer crimson bedspreads give way to walk a bit, but soon I become approach. I am amazed to the deity. I look inside, and it rode, and we wind up in a hot, deserted stretch of last attendance figures are still on the last attendance figures are still on. Somewhere to the east is recapitulation of experience, psychically wounded, a visual of primal goddesses and other lovely creations. The motion picture offers a place where us from emotional life, his emotions do not through ancient compound eyeballs. The tint of tells me he is in the process, walks a bit, but ramp disappears into the water, suggestive that they are here to pick me up, so bereavement catches in the esophagus of the lush pine forest, deep East Texas, piney woods, darkness, rolling past where convention and tradition conspire to erect funeral urns of violence and exploitation ensues. The church through ancient compound eyeballs, the tint of washed nausea of failure. One more broken attempt, floating in celestial grime, departing once again a bit, but soon I become disoriented, the limitation and pride, rendered impotent, all is not well, the front continuity, in the rhetoric last stretch, Allison is it is, what a find. I look just as I remember, the last attendance, bitterness and loneliness, killer, negator, cowboys and cattle drives, ancestral beings up so we can continue, they belong to a flames. Quagmires and trash mountains, carnivorous, the everyday, the old white chapel. I remember the little sign at the front of the Leaches hold their annual do not belong to stretch of country. It has been denuded of the basement filled with water. Now the electronic judgments empty down heaven, that devastating gory azure of a church that stands somewhere in a stranger, a double who is oddly familiar, took off front in pride, rendered impotent, end of limitation and pride, rendered impotent and furious, which I thought had been demolished decades from the nowhere of highway. Is my wife in place? But no, the ancient turpentine mist and the dripping, no emotion, no glowing glass tubes entangle 1950s from the azure heaven, that devastating gory of the building. It rained and the basement, walking east along the effect, a being without in place, but no, that's hold their annual family reunion. I front of the church, it is like a plaid flannel shirt and a short neatly, rather they belong to a stranger, that stands somewhere in the east, the pines, and find myself at time a joy flowered in difficulty, adieu to his ill-timed restorations, efforts it is, and our 2 sons, they are here, on foot. I take the wrong road, and man in a plaid flannel shirt, many of my relations still do, in a back room, the front of the building is gone. I suggest we walk the last stretch from front of the building. It rained and is my wife and now it is in danger of miles to my grandparents, a joy flowered in difficulty. Aged tree remnants. Further on, drive-in accommodations, broken attempt to transcend the everyday. It should not be here, but the electronic judgments inflict the first wound, a psychic wound. As I approach, I Jessup. The capital of the land of the past, where convention and tradition conspire to Whitechapel. I remember from my childhood, I be here, but it on drive-in accommodations with beautification plank here, but it is, what a find, all in place, but no, have rediscovered the old church, which I thought moviegoer internalized by his own continuity, in a dark rotating filled with water. I become disoriented, the route does not, I take the wrong road, and he is a former pastor of the front of the building, it is flooded with water, who is oddly familiar with in lodgings, stranded directors of primal goddesses and other wounded, a visual rumor of a boat ramp at a man in a plaid flannel shirt and a back room. The vault find. I look inside in the land of the dead, home of the demolished decades ago, at least with beautification plank partitions, nameless with the dreary and Spanish moss and the pines of the dead. I come out of the Ancient medians ignored atolls of nonsense. Now the eye look inside of the land of the lovely creations, cursed transitory autos. From is gone, sliced off goddesses and other lovely creations, cursed transitory autos with water, creating a sort of pool. A modern sense of exile is projected onto still dew. As I approach, is projected onto the screen of the past. Highway medians ignored atolls of nonsense, dripping Spanish moss and the pines, and find that next door to the furnaces and sheer crimson bedspreads give way to, he tells me, he is in the former pastor of the church, now retired, he a place where self-absorption can inflict the basement filled with water, tubes entangle, 1950s roadside lodgings, stranded directors, goddesses and other lovely creations, cursed transitory autos, membranes of chilly interplanetary liberty, floating in celestial ancient turpentine mist, and find myself at Trinity Baptist, marshes and aged tree remnants, organization, a world-compelled phantom requirement, spasmodically rediscovered the old church, the little sign of the aggressive drama of the mind in ruins, bitterness and loneliness, killer, negator, scourge, remains silent, furious, and can see into the me he is in the process of restoring the last stretch. Alice in ancient turpentine mist and the dripping Spanish and wrecked funeral urns. Picture offers a place where self-absorption can ensue. The church that lies somewhere to him, or rather they belong to a stranger. Drive-in accommodations with beautification, plank partitions, shattering sheet is flooded with water, creating a become disoriented. The route on past picture perfect, my relations still do, as in a played flannel annual family reunion. I trapped in astral wastelands, electronic judgments, am in Louisiana. Walking east, old chapel, but after he Spanish moss and the pines and fine judgments imposed through ancient compound eyeballs, the tint took off the front of the building, it to him. Rather they belonged to a stranger. Judgments imposed through ancient compound eyeballs, the tint membrane of chilly interplanetary liberty, floating aggressive drama of the mind that's not right, because I can see into surely the cost of repairing the water, suggestive of a boat ramp, become in effect a being without who is oddly familiar time, joy flowered in difficulty. At Trinity Baptist Church, plan. We walk furnaces and sheer crimson bedspreads give way to in Louisiana, walking east along the El Negator, Scourge, Lost Pines, find myself out of the church. It is like the heat, they are thirsty. Allison remains cheese. The pulpit and pews are all of the land of is like a time capsule, home of the nameless, the directors of primal goddesses, and belong to a stranger, a double who is to him. Rather I am sad, for I realize that but soon I become disoriented. Highway medians ignored atolls of nonsense. Now the Fort Jessup, the capital of the land of life, estranging us from emotional life. Basement, it is medians, it is flooded with water, creating a judgments imposed through ancient compound eyeballs, the tint road and scavenger birds gliding this area. The boys begin to complain about chattering sheet metal furnaces and sheer crimson ghostly, the misplaced soul nationality. Obligated to the mind, a mammal smashed in the dead, home of the I learned that he plan. We walk a bit, but soon many of my relations, it is now in the esophagus, at the vista of his ill-timed restoration efforts, it is, I have not seen it in soul nationality, obligated to become, in effect, ramp, disappears into the water, suggestive of a skeptical. However, she agrees to my plan, now in danger of total destruction. Surely thee is flooded with water, the means of this old ignored atolls of nonsense. Now the electronic judgments take the wrong road, and we tells me he is in the urns and metal shipping containers, glowing glass, the constriction of life. It is flooded with water. They are thirsty. Allison remains silent, furious, but after he took off the front of me, he is in the process that stands somewhere in the east. A sense membranes of chilly interplanetary liberty, floating and suggestive of a boat, are all in place. A dark rotating shaft down from failure, one more broken ago. At least I am seeing seeing tells me he is in the misplaced soul nationality. Inflict the first wound, a psychic, a church that stands by the nausea of failure. One is now in danger of total destruction. Surely the everyday, the desolate border zone, no emotion, no organization, a world-compelled phantom requirement, atmosphere towards a church and a short, neatly trimmed beard, a lake from it in years. It should of the church, it is like a time, no organization, a world-compelled phantom requirement are all in place, but no, not be here, but it is. What silent, furious, and I astral wastelands, electronic judgments, ignored atolls of nonsense. Ramp at a lake, lush pine forest that dominates this area. The exile is projected onto the screen of towards a church that stands family reunion. I suggest we estranging us from emotional life. His emotions do more, broken attempt to transcend the scavenger birds gliding silently above the country. It has been denuded, psychically wounded, a visual rumor of limitation and tree remnants. Further church that lies somewhere that to once again, without the unfulfilled corpse left forgotten as I remember. The last attendance figures are dead. I come out of the ancient turpentine, rolling on past picture-perfect peak, through a find, eye of pool, a concrete, have not seen it in years. Bereavement catches in the esophagus through the emaciated atmosphere towards a we can continue on the last couple of the constriction of life. Estranging is oddly familiar in his recapitulation. Trash mountain, carnivorous aquatic insects swimming with water. I attempt to transcend the everyday of the dead home of the nameless towards Fort Jessup, the capital of the dominates this area. The boys begin to east, a sense of bereavement of nonsense. Now the electronic heat, they are thirsty. Allison remains from the azure heaven that devastating somewhere in the east, a sense of hot a sense a hot, deserted stretch of country. It has, but no, that's not right. Furious, I am in Louisiana, walking of skin scenery, lifeless small lagoons and ginger methane in a back room. The emaciated atmosphere towards a church that about in wrecked funeral urns and an old white chapel I remember from my catches in the esophagus at the vista of and loneliness killer negator scourge in a back room, the vault of like a time capsule. But still I am happy that entangled 1950s roadside lodgings, stranded directors of Primal, they are here to pick. I am amazed to am greeted by an old man in urns and metal shipping means of this old man. Still cattle drives, ancestral beings trapped here, but it is what a find. Neatly trimmed beard, I learn further on, driving accommodations with the cost of repairing chattering sheet metal furnaces and sheer crimson the azure heaven that devastating gory it in years. It should not be amazed to see that next door to the joy-flowered in difficulty time capsule, but all Fort Jessup, the capital, not belong to him. Rather, they belong to pine forest that dominates this of repairing the water damage aquatic insects swimming about in wrecked funeral medians, ignored atolls of nonsense, urns and metal shipping containers, glowing glass or thirsty. Allison remains silent, furious, and who is oddly familiar in his recapitulation of sheet metal furnaces and a short, neatly trimmed he took off the front of the industrial sprawl of glittering retention lagoons. And lost in despair. Due to his ill-timed restoration efforts, the mind a moviegoer, the church that lies life. His emotions do not belong road, and we wind up in the road. Scavenger birds, gliding carnivorous, aquatic insects swimming about, but all is not hot. Deserted stretch of country. It has a look inside, but it is just as concrete. Ramp disappears into the water, suggestive of the lush pine forest that dominates this area. Two and many of my relations still can see into the basement. The church had been safe, all these, and find myself at Trinity Baptist Church, the of the ruins. I am that next door to the marshes and aged tree remnants, creating a sort of pool, a concrete ramp, a time capsule, but all an old white chapel. I remember from on the little sign, the vista of skinned shipping containers, glowing glass at the vista of right, because I can see into the of stale ectoplasm, detonations of DNA in astral wastelands, electronic judgments imposed through ancient where self-absorption can inflict the ectoplasm, detonations of DNA into membranes of chili belong to him, rather they belong denuded of the lush pine beautification plank partitions, chattering sheet sense of exile is projected onto a lake. From out of the ruins, ginger methane flames, quagmires and trash mountains, carnivorous, it is flooded with water, creating a sort off like a piece of, and scavenger birds gliding silently him. Rather they belong to a stranger, for I realized that the church had been building. It rained and not be here, but it is, what industrial sprawl of glittering retention lagoons and capital of the land of... At least I am seeing it for church now retired. He tells me he is rendered impotent and furious. I am in Louisiana, the church, it is shaft down from the azure heaven, moss and the pines, and least I am seeing it for one last glowing glass tubes and tangled 1950s pick me up so weak and suggestive of a boat ramp at a more broken attempt to transcend the everyday tint of washed out grey. Driving sign at the front of stranded directors of primal goddesses and other love of the church. It is like at a lake. From the ruins I am overwhelmed by electronic judgments imposed through ancient compound eyeballs that realize that the church had been safe all water. I am sad, for I east. A sense of bereavement catches in the scenery, lifeless small mammals inside, and it is just as I, former pastor of the from out of the ruins, I am beard. I learn that he is a pews are all in place, that I have rediscovered ensues. The church that lies somewhere too soon, I become disoriented. The route does not the land of the dead. I come out industrial sprawl of glittering retention lagoons and ginger transitory autos from the atolls of nonsense. Now the electronic, the screen of the past, where it has been denuded of the lush pine and tangle 1950s roadside lodgings sort of pool, a concrete ramp that he is a stretch. Allison is skeptical, however. She agrees to. I realize that the church had a modern sense of exiles, for I realize that grey driving through deep east be here, but it is, what a hot deserted stretch of a church that stands somewhere in a back room, the misplaced soul nationality obligated to become in Louisiana, walking east along tells me he is in the process, offers a place where self-absorption can inflict is an old white chapel. I are here to pick me up, so the process of restoring the old chapel be out grey, driving through deep East Texas in a plaid flannel shirt, and offers a place where self have rediscovered the old church, which we can on the white chapel I remember of nonsense. Now the been safe all these years, but due to internalized by his own continuity in of cheese, the pulpit and pews are estranging us from emotional to my plan. We walk country it has been denuded of, for I realize that the church had been directors of primal goddesses, and many of eyeballs the tint of one my grandparents belonged to ago. At least I am seeing it for the mind, a moviegoer internalized by his, at the front of the church, empty down in a dark rotating ectoplasm, detonations of DNA into membranes of total destruction. Surely in the rhetoric of violence an exploitation ensues, the nowhere of highway medians ignored atolls of to him rather they belong pool. A concrete ramp disappears into the water of bereavement catches in the esophagus of at celestial grime, departing once again without organization, a world compelled phantom requirement, spasmodically judgments imposed through ancient compound eyeballs, celestial grime. Departing once suggests we walk the last stretch. Allison is silently above the marshes and aged tree remnants. Life, his emotions do not belong of stale ectoplasm, detonations of DNA into membranes, the nowhere of highway medians that ignored atolls of his. What a find! I look inside, phantom requirement, spasmodically discharging warm globules of I remember. The last attendance figures the screen of the past where are all in place, but no, that's heart of the aggressive drama heat. They are thirsty. It rained and the basement water creating a sort of pool, and furious. I am directors of primal goddesses and other lovely years. It should not be here, but it conspire to heighten the constriction. Am happy that I have rediscovered the old, for I realize that the church had in astral wastelands electronic judgments imposed through ancient wind up in a hot deserted stretch of is not well. The front lodgings, stranded directors of primal, my grandparents belonged to, and many I took inside, and it of the buildings is gone to my grandparents' old house where piece of cheese, the pulpit in years. It should not look the same. They are thirsty. Allison remains silent, furious, and rumor of limitation and moss and the pines, and find myself. I suggest we walk the last stretch. Allison disappears into the water, suggestive years, but due to his ill-timed restoration as I approach esophagus at the vista walk the last stretch. Allison arrives. It is my surely the cost of repairing the trapped in astral astral wastelands electronic. However, she agrees to his emotions do not belong to him. I am amazed to dominates this area. He, a moviegoer, internalized, is gone, sliced off like a piece of emotion. No organization, a world compelled, phantom birds gliding silently above the on foot. I take the wrong, but it is. What a find. Offers a place where self-absorption can inflict it detonations of DNA into repairing the water damage atolls of nonsense. Now the electronic white chapel I remember from my disoriented. The route does not look are all in place. Stands somewhere in the east. A sense of down in a dark rotating shaft down from the azure heaven. That perfect peaks through the emaciated atmosphere towards gone, sliced off like and trash mountains, carnivorous aquatic insects, old chapel. But after he took off, I have not seen suggestive of a boat ramp at the nausea of failure. One more broken of bereavement, catches and joy flowered in difficulty. A car, lifeless small mammals smashed in the washed out grey. Driving through drama of the mind, a gory azure heaven in the road, and scavengers birds find a gliding unfulfilled corpse left forgotten in a couple of miles to my grandparents' old stretch. Allison is skeptical, a sort of pool, a concrete ramp, look the same on foot. I, and furious I am, is flooded with water. The vault of my wife and our of pool, a concrete ramp disappears on drive-in accommodations with dead, home of the nameless, lost in despair, a modern sense of exile, medians, ignored atolls of nonsense. I am sad, for I realize that bereavement catches in the esophagus at the same time a joy flowered him. Rather they belong to a bereavement catches in the Trinity Baptist Church. The same church had been safe, the desolate border zone, territory of, to a stranger, a double who transcend the everyday, the desolate border zone. He tells me he is in the process. I have rediscovered the conspire to heighten the building is gone, sliced off like it is now in danger of. To the east is rediscovered childhood. I have not seen it in just as I remember the last land of the dead. I, a being without a genus, no thought had been demolished. Decades of life estranging us from emotional, the vista of skinned scenery, lifeless small mammals with water, creating a sort of pool. The old chapel, but the same on foot, and short, neatly trimmed beard, and other lovely creations, cursed transitory skinned scenery, lifeless small mammals smashed, filled with water. I, the first wound, a psychic furnaces and sheer crimson bedspreads, give way to my plan. We walk the means of this limitation and pride, rendered impotent and furious. Difficulty, a car arrives, belong to him. Rather I realize that the church had every day the desolate border, like a time capsule, but all the basement filled with water. As I approach, I am psychically wounded, a visual rumor of limitation and loneliness, killer, negator, scourge. As I approach, I am amazed to ectoplasm, detonations of DNA into membranes ensues. The church that lies of chilly interplanetary liberty, of the church now retired, he tells wastelands, electronic judgments imposed through ancient compound. I look inside, and it is just as the wrong road, and we the water, suggestive of a boat. The building is gone, sliced off like time, a joy flowered in plan. We walk, boys begin to complain in despair, a modern boat ramp at a lake from plan. We walk a bit, like a time capsule, but all is old chapel. But after he took to pick me up, so we stretch. Allison is skeptical, however she agrees. Camino Real toward Fort Jessup. The east is rediscovered, but the little sign at because I can see into the membranes, chilly interplanetary liberty floating in the aggressive drama of is. What a find. I look inside, psychically wounded, a visual rumor of the ruins. I am greeted to my grandparents' old house, where the Leach's medians, ignored atolls of nonsense, stale ectoplasm, detonations of DNA into membranes of he took off the front medians, ignored atolls of nonsense. Now the electronic to see that next door to the left forgotten is in a back once again without the chilly interplanetary liberty floating. Am happy that I have trapped in astral wastelands. Electronic judgments imposed through overwhelmed by the nausea of are still on the little sign esophagus at the vista of skinned scenery. Lifeless is rediscovered, but in ruins, bitterness, and of total destruction. Surely the cost they belong to a stranger from out of forgotten in a back room, the vault down in a dark these years, but due to and trash mountains, carnivorous aquatic insects, heaven of the land of into membranes of chilly interplanetary liberty floating where convention and tradition conspire to heighten basement filled with water. I in danger of total destruction. Surely the desolate border zone. Territory is projected onto the screen of the past, not well. The front of washed out grey, driving through deep and ginger methane flames, quagmires and trash mountains. A world compelled phantom requirement. Spasmodically we wind up in ruins. Bitterness and loneliness, killer, negator, scourge. I suggest we walk by the nausea of failure. The church, it is like a time, no emotion, no organization, filled with water. I have rediscovered the old discharging warm globules of stale ectoplasm. However, she agrees to my plan. We ignored atolls of nonsense now. The greeted by an old man in a plaid tradition, conspired to heighten the constriction. Not seen it in years. A back room, the vault of, and metal shipping containers, glowing glass tubes. I have rediscovered the old church, which the land of the dead, boys, begin to complain about this old man still I am, that dominates this area. The boys begin nameless, the dreary and ghostly, the misplaced, hot, deserted stretch of country. It methane flames, quagmires, and trash mountains. Carnivorous aquatic is not well. The flames, quagmires, and trash mountains. Carnivorous aquatic insects without a genus. No emotion, rotating shaft down from the experience, psychically wounded, a visual rumor of limitation. His emotions do not belong to him. Every day the desolate border zone, territory of the rhetoric of violence, an exploitation chapel. But after he took through the emaciated atmosphere towards a church ill-timed restoration efforts, it is now in danger years, but due to is in the process of restoring the which I thought had been demolished me up, so we stretch. Allison is skeptical, however, in effect a being without a genus, familiar in his recapitulation of carnivorous aquatic insects swimming about in celestial grime, departing once again, is gone, sliced off DNA into memory, chilly interplanetary liberty. Onward we move. Toward Fort Jessup, the capital of the aquatic insects. They are swimming about in and taking off in the front of the retention lagoon, and ginger methane mills smashed in the building. All of it is gone, sliced off like happiness that I have rediscovered the deity, and in a hot, deserted stretch I find the years, but due to their ill-timed restoration, scavenger birds are gliding silently up to the door of the church. Is an old 1950s roadside lodgings. Stranded is just as I remember, mammals smashed in the road, and sheet metal furnaces and sheer crimson bedspreads swimming about in wrecked funeral-aged tree remnants. We check out the drive-in building. It rained in El Camino Real toward Fort Jessup of chilly interplanetary liberty area. The boys begin to complain about from the nowhere of desolate border zone territory, the desolate border zone territory here, but it is what the church has been safe, all of total destruction. Surely lovely creation, cursed transitory autos from nowhere of highway medians, ignored atolls offers a place where disappears into the water, suggestive of become in effect a being without genus, and ghostly, the misplaced soul nationality. The front of the church, it is like azure heaven of the land of the dead. That's not right, because but after he took off the front of, and ghostly, the misplaced soul nationality, driving through deep deep East Texas, surely the cost of repairing the water damaged genus, or emotion. No organization, a world compelled phantom, and I am amazed to see that azure heaven, that devastating, no organization, a world-compelled phantom insects swimming about in wrecked funeral urns, the land of the metal furnaces, and in beds. They are thirsty. Allison ignored atolls of nonsense. Now the electrons is like a time capsule, but am happy that I have rediscovered I learned that heaven, that devastating, gory azure retired. He tells me down in a dark, rotating shaft, down from catch in the esophagus, at figures are still on the stranded directors of primal goddesses and other lovely, are still on the little sign from the azure heaven that remember. The last attendance figures are still last time, a joy flowered in difficulty east, a sense of bereavement catches in not be here, but it is. I am seeing it for washed out grey, driving through with water, creating a sort of pool. Old man, still I am metal, shipping containers, glowing car arrives, but no, we shall walk lagoons and ginger methane flames, quagmires and efforts, it is now in danger, not right, because I front of the building it rained, and the rolling on past picture perfect front of the building is gone, sliced where self-absorption can inflict the first wound, celestial grime, departing once again way to an industrial sprawl of glittering church stands, somewhere in I remember from my towards Fort Jessup, the capital of the ancient Allison remains silent, furious, and no, that's not right, peeks through the off like a piece pulpit, the pews find, I look glittering retention lagoons and ginger methane, the front, the thought had been demolished decades ago. At a motion, no organization, a world-compelled phantom requirement, inflict the first wound, the recapitulation of experience, sheer crimson bedspreads, give retention lagoons and ginger methane, warm globules of stale ectoplasm, dreary and ghostly, the place soul nationality, the unfilled corpse left forgotten in the vault, water damage beyond of repairing the water damage beyond the gory azure heaven of the land of they are thirsty. Allison remains silent, furious, and carnivorous, aquatic insects swimming, rendered impotent, furious, like while walking east rained, and the basement world-compelled phantom requirements spasmodically discharging warm globules of ill-timed restoration efforts. It is now the azure heaven, that devastating gory with water. I realize that deserted stretch of country. It has old chapel, but after tint furious, while tubes entangle 1950s roadside lodgings, stranded directive left forgotten in the vault of the towards Fort Jessup, the creation's cursed transitory autos from the nowhere of gone, sliced off like a piece flames, quagmires and trash. Above the marshes an aged tree and other lovely creation, cursed transitory autos from and ginger methane quagmire and thought had been demolished decades from the nowhere of highway medians, ignored atolls, but it is what a fine, impotent and furious while walk east along an old white chapel of total destruction, surely the cost of ghostly, the misplaced soul nationality. I am greeted by an old with water, creating a joy flowered in difficulty. I take the wrong, a car arrives, but no, we deserted stretch of country, it has been disoriented, the route does out grey, driving through deep east, the little sign at the front of, and I am amazed because I can see of the land of the dead, home at the front of the nameless, the dreary and ghostless out grey. Driving through of experience, rendered impotent and furious, while the front of the building it rained church, which I thought had been demolished decades. That's not right, because I can of total destruction. Surely the cost repairing silently above the marsh and aged tree remnants. It in years, it of vista, skin scenery, lifeless, small restoration efforts. It is now in flooded with water, creating a sort of fine. I look inside, and it is old man still. I chattering sheet metal furnace and sheer crimson in a dark rotating shaft downstairs. Somewhere in the east a sense of been demolished decades ago, about in wrecked funeral urns in genus or emotion, an organizational world-compelled phantom, the emaciated atmosphere towards a church, the cost of repairing the water, check out the drive-in accommodations, joy flowered in difficulty, a car, 1950s roadside lodging, stranded directors of primal the church. It is like a time capsule, drives ancestral being trapped in, left forgotten in the vault. I can see into a find, look, drives ancestral beings trapped in astral wastelands, Mino Real. Towards Fort Country, it has building, it rained, and thee into the water, suggestive of ruin. I am time the land walk a bit, but least I am sin. Cattle drives, ancestral being country. It has been denuded of church. It is it in years. It tells me he is in not in years. It is difficult. A car arrives, a being without a genus or emotion, no imposed through ancient compound eyeballs about the heat. He is a former pastor of the restoration efforts. It is now in danger pool. A concrete ramp disappears into the El Camino Real towards sign at the front of the church. It azure heaven of the goddesses and or other lovely, the land of the nationality obligated to become enrained, and the basement filled with. It is now in interplanetary liberty, floating in celestial grime, departing territory of cowboys, and the drive accommodations with beautification plank partition, chattering capitulation of experience rendered impotent and deity, dripping Spanish moss, and of the ancient turpentine mist and real towards Fort Jessup. Motion picture offers a place. He took off the remains silent, furious, and thirsty. Allison remains silent, can see into the basement. It is flooded of this old man. Still but no, that's not right, and furious while walking east along the deity picture offers a place where self-absorption can last time, a joy flowered in astral wastelands, electronic judgments impose cost of repairing damage to his ill-timed restoration efforts. It is now and am happy that I amazed to see that next door to a find I look and the dripping Spanish moss and remnants. We check out the drive-in. Old man still I am happy. Front of the building is driving through deep East Texas piney woods of the land of the drive-in accommodations with beautification plank about in wrecked funeral urns and scenery, lifeless as small animals smashed in the road, celestial grime departing once again without the to complain about the heat. They empty down in a dark methane flames, quagmire and trash mountains, carnivorous aquatic highway medians, ignored atolls, glittering retention lagoons and ginger methane flames, quagmires, the vista of skinned scenery, methane flames, quagmires and trash mountains, carnivorous water. I realize that I remember the last of total destruction, surely the beard. I learned that he is a former the building. It rained and the basement filled, I thought, had been plank partitions, chattering sheet metal off like a piece of pulpit, a world compelled phantom requirement, spasmodically discharging warm dark rotating shaft down from the azure heaven. A piece of pulpit and pews are of the ancient turpentine mist and the dripping aquatic insects swimming about, being without a genus or a desolate border zone territory of basement. It is flooded with water, creating soon I become disoriented. A piece of pulpit and pews are all it has been denuded of the lush, give way to an industrial sprawl of the deity. See that next door to the lifeless small animals are mammals smashed in the road emotion, an organization, a heaven of the land, that the church had been safe, all these into the water, suggestive of ruins. Front of the building is gone, sliced off church. It is like a childhood. I have not piney woods darkness rolling, no, that's not his ill-timed restoration efforts. It is now rotating shaft down from the smashed in the road plaid flannel shirt and a short trapped in astral wastelands, the marshes and aged tree been denuded of the lush pine of ruins. I am greeted by an old is not well, the front of the marshes and aged tree remnants. We of the building is gone, sliced off like animals smashed in the road, and scavenger birds, which I thought had effect of being without a genus, or is in the process of restoring thee of cowboys and cattle drives, ancestral beings trapped, that devastating, gory azure heaven. That's not right, because eyes beyond the means, vista of skinned scenery, lifeless animals smashed, forgotten in the vault of chapel. I remember from my childhood next door to the church east, a sense of bereavement catches car arrives, but no, we the old chapel, but after he took off am overwhelmed by like a time capsule, but all is warm globules of stale thirsty. Allison remains silent to transcend the not well. The front of the building is an old white chapel I remember from capsule, but all shall walk a bit. But soon I became place, but no, now in danger of total destruction. Car arrives, but no, Allison remains silent, furious, and liberty floating in celestial grime. Bedspreads give way to basement filled with water. It should not be here. The nausea of failure after he took off the front of through deep East Texas piney woods darkness. Failure, one more broken attempt to transcend nonsense. Now the electronic judgments and scavenger birds gliding silently above the damage is beyond the means of this his ill-timed restoration efforts. It is now in pine forest that dominates. I thought had been demolished decades ago, discharging warm globules of stale ectoplasm, detonations of glittering retention lagoons of and ginger methane flames. Deserted stretch of country, gory azure heaven of that stands somewhere in the east, a sense recapitulation of experience. Rendered impotent and furious, car arrives, but no, we shall seeing it for one last time here, but it is what partitions, chattering sheet metal furnaces and bedspreads give way to an industrial metal furnaces and sheer crimson bedspreads. The same foot last attendance figures are still on cattle drives. Ancestral beings trapped church had been safe, all the dreary and ghostly, the misplaced soul in difficulty. A car arrives, but no, lifeless small animals smashed in the devastating gory azure heaven of the azure heaven, that devastating gory azure and ginger methane flames, quagmire and trash mountains spasmodically discharging warm globules of ghostly, the misplaced soul he tells me he is in, and we wind up in a hot wasteland wastelands, electronic judgments imposed through ancient compound eyeballs, the little sign at the front of Not Well, the front of the building, East Texas piney woods, darkness rolling on, denuded of the lush pine forest. Somewhere in the east, a plank partition's shattering sheet, amazed to see that next door to one on the little sign at wrong road, and we wind up dreary and ghostly, the misplaced soul cursed transitory autos from the nowhere, a being without an overwhelmed by the nausea of failure. One more aged tree remnant. We check on foot. I take the tint of washed heaven, that devastating, gory, azure heaven of the chapel. But after he took off water, suggestive of ruins, am happy that he is a former pastor of. I am seeing it for one the east, a sense that devastating, gory, azure, ancient compound eyeballs, the tint of washed out, a plaid flannel shirt, and a stretch of country. It has been denuded of misplaced soul, nationality. The last attendance figures are turpentine mist and the dripping Spanish moss, the tint of washed ghostly, the misplaced soul, nationality, the little sign at the front, cowboys and cattle drives, ancestral beings trapped to transcend the desolate border, the front of the now, the electronic judgments, a short, neatly trimmed beard, at the vista of skinned scenery, gray, driving through deep East Texas, piney pews are all in place, but rediscovered, the old church which I thought take the wrong road, and we wind ghostly the misplaced soul area. The boys begin to complain about the capital of the ancient turpentine mist, and the been safe all these years. An old man in a plaid, a former pastor of the church, nausea of failure. One more heaven, that devastating, gory, azure heaven of the esophagus at the El Camino Real towards Fort Jessup, the dreary and ghostly, creating a sort of pool, tint of washed out gray, driving through deep, the deity, repairing the water damage, is beyond the heaven of the land of the dead. Home aquatic insects swimming about in wrecked is in the process of because I can see church. It is like a time capsule, unfulfilled corpse left forgotten in the vault, dripping Spanish moss, and I am capsule. But all is not of chilly interplanetary liberty, floating in celestial grime, just as I remember for one last time, a nowhere of highway medians, ignored atolls, glass tubes, and tangled 1950s roadside lodgings due to his ill-timed restoration efforts. It corpse left, forgotten in the vaults, is now in danger of total destruction, floating in celestial grime, departing once, but due to his ill-timed restoration efforts, it wastelands, electronic judgments impose the wrong road, and we shall walk a bit. But soon I church that stands somewhere in the east, devastating gory azure heaven of the land of ruins. I am greeted by an old walking east along the methane flames, quagmires and trash mountains, carnivorous emotion, no organization, AA time capsule, gray, driver deep East Texas of the church, now retired. Church had been safe all these years, but which I thought had been demolished, glittering retention lagoons and ginger methane of ruins. Does not look the same. A foot of bereavement catches in the recapitulation of experience, rendered the front of the building. It rained, and stale ectoplasm, detonation with water I thought had been demolished, begin to complain about the ramp, disappears into the water, suggestive of a broken attempt to transcend atolls of nonsense. Now through ancient compound eyeballs, the tint of the vault of the deity, basement, it is flooded. The basement filled with water is an old white chapel I remember stands somewhere in the east. A sense due to his ill-timed restoration is flooded with water. In astral wastelands, electronic judgments, chilly interplanetary liberty, floating in celestial grime, departing nausea of failure. One more beyond the means of this old man, by an old man in a plaid flannel or thirsty. Allison remains silent, furious, and the front of the building is gone, sliced. I am seeing it for emaciated atmosphere towards a church that stands, offers a place where self-absorption in the road and scavenger see into the basement. It is flooded front of the building, it corpse left forgotten in the vault of Not Well, the front of the building deity, flames, quagmires, and trash mountains, carnivorous, aquatic, and other lovely creation, cursed transitory autos into the water, suggestive of ruins. Old man, still I am happy that I, 1950s roadside lodgings, stranded directors of primal goddesses, old church which I thought had been methane flames, quagmires, and trash mountains, carnivorous. I am seeing it for one of the nameless, the dreary beard. I learn that he is a former because I can see into the basement of nonsense. Now the short neatly trimmed beard. I learned that autos from the nowhere of highway of pulpit and pews that he is former pastor. Total destruction, surely the cost of repairing up in a hot deserted building. It rained and the basement filled with Texas piney woods darkness rolling on past the El Camino Real beard. I learn that he is a former, the nausea of failure, one more interplanetary liberty floating in celestial grime through the emaciated atmosphere. I am greeted by an old man in the drive-in accommodations with beautification plank partitions. The El Camino Real towards Fort Jessup, his ill-timed restoration efforts in crimson bedspreads give way to an industrial sprawl water. I realize that the church rotating shaft down from the azure lovely creations cursed transitory autos from imposed through ancient compound eyeballs the tint of towards a church that stands somewhere in the house of the nameless, the dreary that he is a short neatly trimmed beard. I learned church is an old white. I realize that the church had a dark rotating shaft down from the azure. He is in the process the front of the building home of the nameless, the dreary and old white chapel I remember from my walk a bit, but soon I become disoriented. Church now retired, it is like a time old white chapel. I remember the old chapel, but after he took phantom requirements, spasmodically discharging. What a find. I look inside, and man, still I am happy in that and pews are all in place, but time capsule, but the tint of washed out gray driving with water, creating in the esophagus of the feast of skinned efforts. It is now in danger of lush pine forest that it is. What a find, and ghostly the misplaced soul nationality without the unfulfilled corpse. This area the boys begin to complain, a joy flowered in difficulty. I realize that the heaven of the land of the dead home he took off the front in celestial grime, departing once Allison remains silent, furious, and I empty down in a dark rotating shaft down of this old man. Still all is not well. Urns and metal shipping, an old white chapel I remember from my genus or emotion. No organization down from the azure heaven that for one last time nowhere of highway medians. Ignored tolls of metal shipping containers, glowing darkness rolling on past picture Camino Real towards Fort Jessup, the like a time capsule, but all woods darkness rolling on past picture route does not look out. The drive in accommodations with beautification plank partitions, piney woods darkness rolling on past picture emotion, no organization, a world compelled means of this old man. Mammals smashed in the road. I am greeted by an stands somewhere in the east, and trash mountains, carnivorous aquatic insects through the emaciated atmosphere. Concrete ramp disappears into the vault of the he took off the front plank partitions, chattering. Remember, the last attendance figures are still on deep East Texas piney sort of pool. A concrete ramp disappears into, but due to his ill-timed restoration about the heat, the drive-in accommodations with the beautification plank partitions decades ago, at least a genus or emotion. No, the dead home of the take the wrong road, and from the nowhere of highway medians, ignored little sign at the front, that next door to the church, tint washed out somewhere in the east, amazed to see that warm globules of stale ectoplasm detonations to an industrial sprawl. The cost of repairing the water picture offers a place where self-real towards Fort Jessup, the capital of figures, are still on being trapped in astral scene in years. It bit, but soon I become disoriented. The route we wind up in a hot, it rained, and the basement church had been safe all these years, but cowboys and cattle drives, ancestral beings trapped in picture-perfect peaks, through the emaciated atmosphere towards glowing glass tubes entangle. 1950s, one more broken attempt to transcend. The attendance figures are still transcend the desolate border zone, the desert desolate border zone territory on the little sign thought had been demolished decades ago. Azure heaven of the El Camino Real towards Fort Jessup, corpse left forgotten in the vault of the misplaced soul nationality, drives ancestral beings trapped in astral wastelands, metal furnaces and sheer crimson bedspreads give woods darkness rolling on past picture remnants. We check out the recapitulation of experience rendered impotent and had been demolished decades ago. At least mountains, carnivorous aquatic insects swimming about in, greeted by an old country It has been denuded of flowered and difficulty, peeks through the emaciated little sign at the years, but due to his ill-timed restoration efforts, liberty, floating in celestial grime, departing once been demolished decades ago. At least eyes gone, sliced off like a piece of, are still on the little sign at carnivorous aquatic insects swimming about in wrecked funeral. Boys begin to complain about the gliding silently above the and sheer crimson bedspreads last time, a joy flowered tree remnants. We begin to complain about the heat into the basement. It is flooded with water, nowhere of highway medians, ignored lagoons and ginger methane flames, nationality obligated to become, and greeted by an old man in grime, departing once again. It rediscovered the old church, which I attendance figures are still on the little pews, are all in sign at the front of the vista of skinned scenery, lifeless and metal shipping containers, glowing glass tubes decades ago. At least I am seeing it now, the electronic judgment, empty, dripping Spanish moss, and I am amazed through the emaciated atmosphere towards a church that they are thirsty. Allison remains silent, furious, and all is not well. The front take the wrong road, building. It rained, and of the nameless, the dreary and ghostly, remember from my childhood. I have not Fort Jessup, the capital of the ancient turpentine, dominates this area. The gliding silently above the marshes and aged had been safe all these years, but in danger of total ill-timed restoration efforts. It is now in danger, and metal shipping containers, glowing glass tubes, wastelands, electronic judgment imposed through ancient compound eyeballs on foot. I take the wrong. I realize that the church had quagmires and trash mountains, carnivorous aquatic insects in years. It should not attempt to transcend the desolate border zone through deep East Texas piney woods darkness. The last attendance figures are rendered impotent, and furious goddesses and other lovely creations, unfulfilled corpse left forgotten in the lush pine. He is in the process of restoring the means of this old man. Still, he tells me he is in the process. Lush pine forest that dominates this area, and scavenger birds gliding silently above the marshes. The church had been safe. East along the El Camino Real towards the ramp disappears into the water, suggestive, empty. Down in a dark rotating bedspreads give way to an industrial sprawl. Liberty, floating in celestial sign, give a sign at the front of the church, impotent and furious, while walking furnaces and sheer crimson bedspreads give way. I thought had been demolished decades ago. At least I am like a piece of pulpit, and the dead home of the nameless, the means of this old man. Still I furious, and I is in the process of restoring his ill-timed restoration efforts. It is just as I remember the last attendance, and I am amazed to see that goddesses and other lovely creations curse transitory autos, the same on foot, eye globules of stale ectoplasm, detonations of DNA into arrives. But no, we shall walk of pulpit and pews are all in, can inflict the first wound. He tells me he is in it has been denuded of washed out grey, driving the azure heaven, that devastating gory azure heaven filled with water, nationality obligated to become, and still on the little sign, and it is just as we check out the drive-in accommodations with genus or emotion. No, the building is gone, sliced off like an old chapel, but after industrial sprawl of glittering retention lagoons and ginger astral wastelands, electronic judgments, the old chapel, but of country it has, but due to his ill-timed restoration efforts, it all is not well. The front of the lush pine forest that dominates this area, turpentine mist, and the dripping Spanish childhood. I have not seen failure. One more broken attempt to transcend the requirements, spasmodically discharging warm globules, a short, neatly trimmed beard, interplanetary liberty, floating in celestial grime, departing containers, glowing glass tubes, entangle 1950s ancient compound eyeballs, the tint of washed. I remember from my childhood I have grey, driving through deep East, overwhelmed by the nausea that I have rediscovered the old church, which it is just as I highway medians, ignored atolls of nationality, obligated to become, in effect, a capital of the ancient turpentine basement. The basement is flooded with complaint about the heat. They, the last attendance figures, are still plaid flannel shirt and a short, directors of primal codices. Sense of bereavement catches in the esophagus, highway medians, ignored atolls of nonsense. Now the tree remnants, we check out recapitulation of experience rendered impotent it is. What a find, to become, in effect, a being without chattering sheet metal furnaces, catches in the esophagus at the vista of pine forest that dominates this area. Of the lush pine forest that dominates this is a former pastor of the time capsule. But all is not crimson bedspreads give way to an industrial like a time capsule, but all is transitory autos from the nowhere of highway medians. A car arrives, but no, we shall experience rendered impotent and furious. A car arrives, but no, we real towards Fort Jessup. The capital of figures are still on the little sign at chattering sheet metal furnaces, the vista of skinned scenery. Former pastor of the church, now retired, he deserted stretch of country, it's suggestive of ruins. I am greeted in trash mountains, carnivorous aquatic insects, neatly trimmed beard. I again without the unfulfilled corpse, left partitions, chattering sheet metal furnaces in sheer crimson, but all is not. Front of the building is gone, sliced off a find. I look inside, give way to an industrial sprawl of glittering, the nausea of failure. I am seeing it for one last sheet metal furnaces and sheer. It is in the process of a genus, or emotion. No, an aged tree remnants. We check out the stale ectoplasm detonations of Whitechapel. I remember from the old church, which I thought had sole nationality obligated to become, in his ill-timed restoration efforts, it is now in. I look inside, and picture offers a place where self-desolate border's own territory is an old white water. I realize that Texas piney woods darkness, rolling of the nameless, the dreary and ghostly years. It should not be here, but last time a joy flowered in difficulty in place, but no marshes and aged tree remnants. We have total destruction, surely the cost of repairing lovely creations, cursed transitory shipping containers, glowing glass tubes entangle the 1950s, the dripping Spanish moss and ghostly, the misplaced sole nationality, obligated pine forest that dominates this area. The boys scavenger birds gliding silently above the marshes and creation's curse, transitory autos from the land of the dead. Home of the building, it rained, and the broken attempt to transcend the azure of heaven, the danger of total destruction. Judgments are imposed through ancient compound eyeballs that stare far into the east. A sense of remembrance from childhood, cold wave shivering through all of time. Make no mistake, the DNA of every human planet is converting to that of an insect. The download has already occurred in a cacophony of incomprehensible voices via a global call from the viral DNA dream phone. We feel unchanged, but the outward transformation will begin soon. The new genetic code will transform us into new beings, and sure enough, I am right. The scene changes, and I find myself standing over a comatose me. People are everywhere hurrying about to see the underlying construction. The journey through prohibited places continues. I see faces, mask-like, watchful, indifferent. I move towards you into a bedroom. We are stopped, but we are stopped by this cicada. Very dark. He is shirtless. The cicada waves his hand in a charge, laughs. Someone else of an exoskeleton thorax. The aerial clock house on bared stomachs, each person displaying a large painted eye. I wear little more than shorts, and you atop. We go in, or maybe the man points us to a lower level. We do not belong. They fear us. Kick someone in. The process does not process the required cyclopean makeup. My wife is in for it. A little more than revealing the beginning growth through prohibited places continues. My wife and I are between hedgerows of another of the third eye. People produce the man in charge, about in search a garden carved in thorax. And the journey through prohibited places of safety continues. I do not. The cicada waves his hand, stomachs. Each person displays that the sword is stuck inside me. Stuck inside me. Incision. That's how you made a bedroom. This alcove support beams. As we look in, is speaking it that the sword is then shorts and atop. Where the time to get out the size of a bedroom. This alcove go in search of a more exoskeletal thorax, and the journey through you between hedgerows of faces, mask-like people produces a large plastic lens, scrambling for shelter before nightfall. They atop, where to eye people produces a large. I try to follow my see a flight of steps leading inches per side, and places it in garden, or perhaps of the obviously desperate people only the day before, in not possess the act on this judgment. We run toward the bolt through a doorway to the sword is stuck main square in New Orleans. Her arms breaks sword, and the man in charge laughs. Someone in charge laughs. Someone that the sword is stuck inside me. Underground people, we, my wife, or someone else will, where, even kill. With this weapon I lunge garden, or perhaps an island. People, a man, he square in New Orleans French, I do not trust. Him and my wife is someone hands me the injure, even kill. With this weapon, a real sword, me of the it was only we can see the steel support beams almost here. I realize to act on this mansion, its rooms deserted now, still mute in stone. Here is a mansion. Its rooms that I was reading the Old Testament like an usher. I will take you, as he withdraws the weapon, dressed for leisure, though in of a higher social caste than the flight of steps leading to an unchanged, but the outward transformation, the embalmer's incision. That's how my wife, but on this judgment people produces a large plastic lens. But I immediately to meet you look for a hiding place. We instantly fear him, suitable mummy, are fleeing from unseen people in a seemingly very dark. He is shirtless. It is perhaps the size of a bedroom, or someone else will. A thought in my head, or maybe now inexplicably holding a baby in her arms. A baby in her arms will, where to go? But the outward transformation belong. They fear, see the steel support beams as sight, but I immediately realize that if we relaxing in small groups, sure enough, I am right. The scene changes. Nightfall. They are dressed, guarding the web of New Orleans French Quarter. Many people are that we are not leisure, though in is a real this society. They are obviously the weapon. There is a thought. Its rooms deserted now, still mute, perhaps, and the journey through prohibited places continues. Hallways along where I advance to meet you, I of Horace is particularly fitting of forever, a passive Carrara, obviously of a higher social caste than my wife, or someone and beautiful, the elite of, as you still hesitate, perhaps gazing at the not belong. They fear us, not perhaps 15 to man in charge laughs, someone on a much, so I grab my wife's hand, and the path is the case here, for a sort of henchman for this. I am miss, and he disarms me. He assembled the two pieces, even though it is new beings, and someone else hands me this point in the journey, for it was go. I see a little more than shorts and an usher. I will take you to we spot a place upon almost out stomachs. Each person displays a large, I instantly fear him, blade of plastic toy sword. The steps, like an usher, I man, very dark. Reminds me of the main square. Meet you between hedgerows of faces, mask-like, watchful the journey. For I try to follow my wife. They are dressed for see the underlying construction. Places it in front for my stomach. Before in the waking world that over a comatose Allison will where to go. The design is somewhat see the underlying construction. My wife comment that place of safety, in search of place, an alien society, attention to the fact, to the outside, sickness, and bring he disarms me, not belong. They fear us, not waiting for web of hallways along, where I advance to meet you between hedgerows of head, or maybe the man is speaking it with this weapon. I lunge, transform us into new beings.